Good morning, children. I'm away for the weekend, so I've set this up beforehand. Our story today that I've got for you is The Prince in Disguise. So you need to listen very carefully. There was a king who had this magnificent kingdom, really. It was bigger than you can imagine. It was huge. And the king loved to go out and see his people explore. And in many, many ways, he was a very happy king. And the people liked him, and people would come out when he went around in his chariot, and they'd wave to him and be quite happy. The king, however, had one thing that he didn't own, even though he was very rich, or didn't own, it was something he really wanted. And it was actually, he would love to have a son or a daughter. He'd love to have a child. And eventually, his wife became pregnant and she gave birth to a son. And to begin with, when the child was very little, the king would take him too in the chariot, and they would go around, and the little child would see, but not very much really, because it was so small. But bit by bit, the king thought to himself, there are terrible things that happen out here in the big world. I don't really want my son to see all of these things. And he became frightened for his son. And so he made around the palace a great wall to really protect his son. Effectively locked his son inside the palace. Now, inside the palace, he had everything you could ever want. But as the prince grew, he knew that there was something different, something exciting, something wonderful outside, and he was desperate to go and see. And so he learnt about disguises until he was so good at disguises, he could get into a disguise and disappear out into the community and wander around. One day, the king realised his son was missing, and he sent out a search party, and no one could find his son anywhere. People began to report sightings, and they even sent in things so that the king could say, yes, that was definitely him or not. I've got some photos here that they've sent in to the king. Because the prince was so good at disguising, people sent in things that you might not even expect. I don't know if you can see this image of the lady sitting there begging, or is it the prince in his wonderful disguise? Begging, but also just looking, listening, hearing what's going on. Someone else saw this child, and they thought, could that be the prince? It's a great disguise, just as a poor shepherd boy, so poor that he drinks water from just the little creek down the back where the sheep drink water. Could that be the prince? They didn't know. Someone else said in this photo of what looks to me like a little girl, but they wondered, is the prince so good at disguises that he could pretend to be an orphan girl, looking in the streets for someone to love her, looking for someone to care for her? They didn't know if it was the prince or not. Someone else had been visiting their friend in jail, and they saw this man. They wondered, is that the prince? He would join some group or something just in his disguise, so good that even the authorities didn't know who it was, and they locked him up with all the others. The prince, presumably still staying in disguise, wouldn't want to say who he was. Is that the prince? I don't know. Maybe the prince kind of got dressed up as a woman, like this woman here, but then became sick and landed up in hospital. I wonder if that is the prince very good disguise. Bit sad that he became, or she became, is it her? Is it the woman there, or is it the prince in a great disguise? Got one more picture that someone sent in. This time it was a whole group of people. They weren't sure which one might be the prince, but there was something about this group that made them wonder, would the prince have joined that group as he went exploring? Was that the prince clambering over from the boat, trying to come up to the shore? They didn't know, but they knew they had to keep looking. And bit by bit, the people in that place began to treat everyone as if, well, maybe they might be the prince. I wonder how you would treat the prince if you've met the prince. Would you treat him with very much with respect and love and care? I wonder how we treat the people that we encounter. So today, our story is about the prince in disguise. Can we recognise the prince? In the name of the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit.